Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad you're here today. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just take a moment and put your feet flat on the floor. You got your journal someplace nearby on page 96 for today. So kind of balance that and don't think too much about it, but then I do want you to think about your breath. Just come to your being, your space. Whatever has happened earlier today and whatever's happening later, those aren't happening right now. So just take a moment and really be in your space, in your body, your heart center, your mind, your gut, all of those in alignment. I'd like you to take a moment and focus on this, on the screen, this image. This image is titled Roof of the World. It's an image from Central Asia's Tibetan Plateau. Its average elevation is more than 14,700 feet. It's the world's highest and largest plateau, covering an area roughly 4 times the size of Texas. The tectonic forces of the plates have shaped this landscape. It's crumpled it, uplifted mountain ridges, and this scene also features some of the area's deep glacier-fed lakes. It comes from a website called Earth as Art. This is a photograph. This is a picture. The interplay of visible and invisible light across the electromagnetic spectrum made possible by satellite sensors. So this is Earth, the beauty of Earth from a different perspective. It's a new way of looking at our world. If you'd like to see more Earth as Art from all over the world, the Earth Resources Observation and Science Center in the U.S. Geological Survey is where you can find more of this. So understanding, seeing our world from new perspectives. A couple of announcements as we get started here. We have an extra credit movie started this Wednesday, March 29th at 7 o'clock. I have not sent out a Canvas announcement with all of these separate little announcements, but I will do that today. So extra credit movie on Wednesday. And then tomorrow night, there's a program that I thought was very interesting. It's called The Science of Cannabis, From Memory Effects to the Munchies. So as speaker, Jason Kilmer, it's on Zoom. And so I'll send out the Zoom link information to you. This is being hosted here at Penn State as an educational opportunity. Maybe answer some questions that some of you that I have. Looking forward to seeing what they have to say. So I'll send out both of those in an announcement to you. So where we have been now, going back the last couple of weeks, we've been working on this. We've been thinking about the symptoms, right? And what is the problem and what's causing the problem. So 3 different layers that we're looking at of where we are with this challenging situation, with all of the climate change and oceans and chemical contamination and habitat destruction and pandemics. We think of the pandemic as a virus, an enemy that must be stopped. Not so much now, but a couple of years ago, and having just had it last week, 2 weeks ago, that it is still a challenge, right? The scientific standpoint, though, it's another life form seeking its own success and survival because we've encroached upon its habitat. It's been forced to take up residence in a place where it didn't start. So these are all issues, all challenges that we're facing in this world where we live today. Right, where we've all been born into this space. So today I have my friend Emily with me. She is a graduate student And the focus of her research is about climate anxiety. So I understand, I've been hearing from your TAs that there is a lot of emotion happening around this very challenging place in the semester where we are right now, part 2 of this course. So it wouldn't be environmental science if I didn't tell you about the things that are really going on, right? It can't just be all the feel-good stuff all the time, and so that we are educated about what's happening in our world, or that sparks your interest to go out and explore the things that we talk about in here, and find out, figure out more for yourselves. So I'd like to bring this quote: "Whenever you think or you believe or you know, you're a lot of other people, but the moment that you feel, you're nobody but yourself." So what I'm thinking about goes back to last Wednesday when we were talking about story, how our culture carries these stories, and particularly this history of our country, all of these very hard stories that still proliferate in our culture. They're underlying stories that we may or may not be aware of, how they're shaping people around us. Even if you don't think that it might be shaping you, it might be shaping people that we work for, or people in our families, or opinions that we are hearing about culture, challenging situations that add these layers to what's happening in our environment. So we need to, ask some of these hard questions. So last week we talked about capitalism, we talked about economism and greed and ignorance around those connections, and what happens if we need to create a new story. What could that new story possibly look like, because we are so ingrained in where we are now in the story of economism. And so this was our idea last week, is that that we're separated, right? So today's hypothesis is that, is it true that this world of wounds that we're seeing is a reflection of our own inner world? Some of the emotions and experiences that we take in are just this experience that we're having inside, and what's our culture telling us about who we are as individuals. So we know that, if someone in my household is sad, I feel that sadness, right? It ripples out of us, the emotion. Or if I'm generating love and acceptance and appreciation and gratitude, then things seem to come, right? They come into my life, they come into my world in a very different way. So how is it then separation from ourselves spreads out into the world around us? How is that part of our story? We must be able to go back to our breathing, right? And be able to breathe through these really challenging questions that we're facing. So Emily is going to talk a little bit about where this whole idea may have come from, too.
So, real quick, has anyone heard of the Cartesian split before, this concept? It's also kind of hard to see. Mm-hmm. So has anyone?
I don't see any hands.
Okay. Has anyone heard, are there any philosophy majors in the house? Has anyone heard of Descartes? Oh, that's better.
There's one person in the back.
All right. We have someone up in the back. So you all might be familiar with the saying, "I think, therefore I am," right? Can someone, maybe brave volunteer, share what that might mean to them? Maybe our philosophy major.
There she is.
So that was like Descartes' most important discovery, was that he could prove his existence because he could think.
Yeah, so that's a really great way to put it, right? So he could prove his existence because he could think, because he had a brain. But and he like could perceive himself, right? But what about everything else in this world that maybe has a brain or thinks? Is it really truly because you think and you can perceive yourself that you exist in this world? Or maybe is there other ways that you can exist, right? Like our physical form, we can exist there. And so the Cartesian split is about this separation, this space between our mind and our body and our spirit. And so when I say mind, I think of like your intelligence, how you think about things. Your body is like your physical being, and your spirit is that extra bit that like makes you you, that you can't really put words to, but it's not your intelligence and it's not your physical form, if that makes sense. And so I'm actually in a research class right now called Critically Conscious and Humanizing Research Methods. And we read a lot of Indigenous authors, Black authors, Chicana authors. And recently, last week, we were talking about relationships. And we were talking about relationality. And I read this Indigenous author named Sean Wilson. And in that, this author put relationships in a way that I never seen it before, and it clicked for me. So I wanted to share that today. And that is like, if you think about relationships and a relationship between you and yourself, or you and another human, or you in the more than human world, like the environment, there's space there, right? And when we become closer in relationship, that space lessens, right? And when it's further away, that space increases. You can think about it like a romantic relationship, right? Like if you really want to be with someone, you lessen that space between you and that person, physically, emotionally, things like that. But if you break up with them, you don't want to be with them anymore, you increase that space. So we do that with ourselves, we do that with the environment, and so this like concept, this Western concept that Descartes introduced leads to this separation between humans and the environment. There are other cultures around the world that don't have this separation. So
The point about how our education system.
Oh.
Yeah. Could
Yeah.
you talk about that for a minute?
yeah, thanks for reminding me.
Oh, no problem.
So thinking about our Western education system, we're all in here right now and we're sitting and we're learning, but we're not moving our bodies. I mean, some of you are fidgeting and stuff, but we're sitting and we're learning with our brains. But then when you're gonna foster your physical being, you go to PE, right? Or you play sports, or you do something else that's completely separate from learning concepts and things like that. And so in our system, we have this separation, and it's designed like that. And so it's just something to think about. Like, I know when I take walks, that's when I do my best thinking and learning sometimes, because I'm also in my body. So reducing that separation can be important too.
Mm-hmm. So what this leads to is this separation that we feel within ourselves, I believe. So when you look at yourself in the mirror, do you smile? Like that first moment, you walk into the bathroom in the morning like, oh my gosh, there I am. I am an amazing human being. This is so fabulous. I'm so happy to see myself this morning. So happy to be right here. Is that how it goes, right? Or is it like, oh my God, my hair, like, oh, it's a bad hair day. Oh well. Like, is there compassion there? Or is there, what kind of attitude, what kind of language are you using to talk to yourself? What is that conversation that goes on? Is it that, as we tune into our self-talk, what I've discovered is that what we experience, the majority of people are experiencing in today's world, is this really negative place of self-talk where we say things to ourselves that we would never consider saying to another person. You would never be like, wow, bad hair day, that really sucks. Yeah. So it's we would never be able to, talk to people in a way like that. So how is it that goes on, right? 50 words per minute, that's 3,000 words per hour that our minds are racing through. And so what happens when we tune in to that? And what happens when we start asking ourselves where that came from, If it's like a courtroom filled with all kinds of judgments and prohibitions and things like that, or is your mind like that cozy living room where you feel really super comfortable to be with yourself? Maybe it's that trance of unworthiness, that feeling that we're never good enough in some way. Never good enough or smart enough, or it's this separation that she's talking about, right? The separation of the mind, that Cartesian split that might lead to this. So not good enough or smart enough. It's the general mood of our beings, it seems, from my observation and conversation with people. A deep-seated suspicion that most of us harbor that we cannot be loved or that we are not truly lovable just for who we are. What happens if we see ourselves as these beautiful, wonderful, amazing creatures, right? So I want you to take a moment and think about ways that you judge yourself. What does that look like? What does that look? I am not blank enough. I am not blank enough. What happens in that space for you? So take a minute, quiet minute to reflect first. I'm not blank enough. And then if you choose, it sounds like some of you want to talk to your neighbor. Go for it. Talk to your neighbor. This is really vulnerable. Looks like I'm going to talk a little more after that.
It's okay.
Okay. Thanks for hanging out.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It's amazing.
It's a little it hits kind of hard, even if you try to, say good things, there's always bad things, and then you have to switch it, but to have the energy to completely switch
Yep.
is hard.
Well, I'm more than 20 years older than you, and so I've had longer to work on it, and I would never go back. I love being in my 40s because it feels like finally a place where I can just, and still it comes up, so.
I feel like as I get older, I do get more comfortable and
Yeah.
more almost secrets.
Yeah, right. Exactly. For sure.
I'm too exhausted to not.
Right, exactly. It's exhausting to be other people. And then it's also exhausting, it still happens though with my parents, where sometimes, my dad will say something and I'll think, I'm not responsible enough, I'm not grown up enough, I'm not doing what he wants me to, it's interesting. I know, but it's amazing how just one thing he can say, I'm disappointed that you are choosing this, and I'd be like, so it can spring up, right, all that back up, so.
The social conditioning.
Yep.
That's why
Yep.
it's important to talk about it.
Yep, exactly. All right, so let's bring it back around here. So my example is that I don't think I'm fun enough, right? I don't think I'm very fun. And what I've learned over time is that I've been hanging out with people who are doing things that I'm not comfortable with. And so I've put myself in places with people who are saying things or doing things that don't really represent who I am. And so when they say, like, you don't want to do this, you're so unfun, right? Oh, wait. And that becomes my story, is I'm unfun. But recently I've been hanging out with people, I just shared this with somebody that's important to me. I said, I don't feel very fun. And they were like, what are you talking about? Like, there's never been a time when I've suggested an adventure and you've said no. Like, and it's because I finally found somebody that, like, we have the same idea of what's fun. And so I've carried this story, and still there are times I carry this story of, I'm not fun, so who wants to hang out with me? I'm not very fun. So we were just talking about how this is social conditioning, whether it comes from your parents. My dad will still make a comment about some way, some choice that I've made in life that it isn't how he would do it, and suddenly I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not responsible enough, I'm not grown up enough, I'm not, and yet I'm, I should feel like I'm in that place. So these things come around. It's definitely social conditioning. And then what do we do about that? Remember this from last week, the picture of the mall? What it represents, all of that fuel and consumption and greed and disconnect. And yet what happens, when we try to fill those places where we feel like we're not enough with other things, it becomes that we're in this place of false belonging where we're needing, I'm not fun enough, so I'm trying to silence, I'm trying to be small, I'm trying to fit in, I'm trying to be something I'm not. And we were just saying how exhausting that is, to be in a place of false, I need to act a certain way, and just really running out of energy for that. So some of the stories that you read last week, this idea of silencing, and then what you did in your council, is to bring up some of those silences and find community, find places where we have things in common around this. And yet in those your small groups, you might be finding that kind of community, and yet the story, again, that we go out into the world is that we are separate from each other. People have a house like this where you can drive your car into the garage and go into the house, and you don't ever really need to see your neighbors. And you might have a fence around your yard, and even right now I had to put up a taller fence because I have a dog who likes to jump the fence, and it makes me feel like I'm living in Jurassic Park, which makes me feel even more separate from my neighbors. And so how we use this private transportation in our private living areas, mostly lives indoors, except that as human beings, we are radically social animals, right? We need our community. Remember, go back to the very beginning, that sidewalk experiment. What do you do when you see that other person on the sidewalk? What you do creates community. And yet, when I heard from some of you, you said, I look down at my phone, right? I don't need to talk to that person approaching me. So this book, Alone Together, why we expect more from technology and less from each other. And look what it's, focusing on kids. This may have been you, and I see it in my own children. It's such a battle because they think that this is the way that we connect, right? Instead of visiting, we phone, or instead of phoning, we text, or instead of texting, we post updates to our story. Getting farther and farther away from those real connections, those places where we can have hard conversations about, I feel like I'm not enough. And yet the more that we talk about it, the more that we shape the community that we're part of. So this phone addiction, it seems to have gotten more and more challenging, particularly through the pandemic. People are even more separate and trying to get, this room of people talking to each other has been challenging. That first semester back was super hard to get people to talk to each other. And now I love that you all just jump into conversation when you have the chance. So there are these small things, or what feel like small things, and then all of those small things add up to the bigger disconnect, where we're separate from each other in ways. At this moment in history, humans are a dangerously insane and very sick species. As a testament to our insanity, humans killed over 100 million fellow humans in the past century alone. No other species violates itself on such a grand scale. Only a people who are deeply alienated state would create such a reality. This is Eckhart Tolle. So it starts as the small stuff, and it leads, to these dramatic points of disconnect. So that separation hypothesis, separate from ourselves, separate from each other, separate from Earth,